Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back to another episode of Finding Light with me, Brad Carr. Today I'm very excited to bring you the latest episode that I recorded with Norman McCloskey, a wonderful Irish photographer who places emotion over logic generally in his photographs. I'm sure if you check out Norman's work you'd be blown away by the quality and the level of emotion that goes into his work. They portray a sense of stillness and calmness, and very much kind of sums up how he feels whilst he's out in the landscape. Me and Norman went very deep in conversation, and he has lived a very interesting life and had lots of experiences that he's congregated now into his creative works, and I'm sure you'll be just as fascinated as I was when you hear Norman's stories. So now I'm going to bring you my conversation with Norman McCloskey. Okay, so Norman, we're live. I do apologise. We were just right in the middle of some good stuff then, and I realised that I wasn't recording, so we're gonna have to go right the way back to.
Not at all. I'm sure we'll get to it again. Don't worry.
Yeah, we'll find our way back there. So I'm really curious, Norman. What is it about for photography for you that draws you and has drawn you now for 30 years?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there are many aspects to it. I think really it was always going to be landscape photography for me. I don't think I was ever cut out to be any other type of photographer, and I did try,
Yeah.
and I did work in other areas of photography for quite a while. But as a young fellow who picked up a camera, without having any inkling that even there was such a thing as landscape photography, my first instinct was to pick up that camera, put a roll of film into it, and head out into the landscape by myself for a day and start taking pictures of trees and, waterfalls and stuff like that. Having never done anything like this before and never really done an activity like that where I'd gone off by myself. And that was such a powerful and incredibly kind of fulfilling experience. And when I got hooked very quickly as a a very avid amateur photographer without any influences whatsoever. I couldn't have even named another photographer, at all, anyone. And there wasn't a photographer in the town where I was living at the time in Kerry. And so there was a certain purity to it,
Yeah.
which was amazing, and I'm so thankful for that. I think, I'm so grateful for that. That I suppose I kind of emerged out of a time of real innocence, and I found my way, and I found what I liked without having to feel that, oh, this is what I should be doing
Mm.
or whatever. I knew instinctively, yeah, if you have a camera, you should be taking pictures of more things. You should be taking pictures of people and stuff. And I was never very comfortable doing portraiture. Um, but when I went to college and I studied photography, my whole mind was open up to every single area of photography, from the whole artistic and conceptual side of it to commercial photography to studio photography
Yeah.
to, and then you had to start thinking in terms of, well, I've given up a lot to come here and do 2 years of college. I'm going to have to get a job at the end of this. And then you realize there are only a few areas of photography you can go in and work in. And none of them really seem to be a fit for me,
Mm.
at all. I tried to get into commercial photography, and I was an assistant to a commercial photographer for about a year. And, I had a great time. And the photographer I worked with was really, really good, very creative. And we did some cool stuff,
Mm.
flying around in helicopters and, working with models and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I just never felt that I ever wanted to do what he was doing, or even that
Yeah.
I could do it.
So you
And then I worked.
clearly knew yourself very well back then to know that that wasn't
I,
you.
I wouldn't say that.
Ah.
I wouldn't say necessarily that I knew myself. I I I I worked on an instinct that was almost a lot of self-defeating kind of impulses. I kept kind of scratching off the things that I wasn't going to do, but no one was going to tell me what it is that you're going to do.
Yeah.
Um, and I kept coming up against things that, like I worked in the catering industry, mostly part time, since I was about 15. And I thought I wanted to do that for a living because I thought, well, that's all I know how to do. And, I realized actually, no, I'm never going to be like a hotel manager or a bar manager or
Sure.
anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I kind of experienced things and I was crossing them off the list as I went along. And there was
Mm.
nothing that was jumping out at me saying, this is what you're going to be good at. And then I
Mm.
accidentally, found myself working for a sports photography agency. And within, I'd say 2 weeks of going in there, I knew I didn't want to be a sports photographer. you know, there was nothing about it that I saw all the guys going off every day. I saw them coming back on a Monday morning and all they did was moan and complain
Mm.
about, the job and the pressures of it and everything. And it was a lot different back then. We were working on film and there was all sorts going on. But I seem to somehow gravitate towards running the agency. And I started running the picture desk and then I developed an area in it. And then I kind of found something by accident that I was really good at,
Yeah.
which was, a kind of an organizational ability to deal with all the areas of photography that I loved, but without, solely focusing on one. Um, that gave me a huge, huge opportunity in life to have a very well paid job, a lot of freedom. And then out of that, I had the freedom to be creative. And I just kept working away with landscape photography.
Mm.
And in the back of my mind, it was always the dream. I always wanted to be, a landscape photographer. And by this stage, I was kind of aware of, people who were now professional landscape photographers. Um, and I guess, it was literally a daydream because I never saw myself ever having a career as one. Um, and it was only I spent 18 years in this job with the sports photography
Mm.
agency. And it was only in the last maybe 3 years that the position got quite difficult and stressful, and the whole kind of job satisfaction out of it was gone. And I wanted to leave, but I felt
Yeah.
quite trapped. Um, and the idea of being a landscape photographer, the dream suddenly became a desire. But I still didn't see a path into it.
Yeah.
And it was only when really the opportunity for the gallery that presented itself by, another sliding doors moment. And I just went for it. Um, that, that it's now become apparent that this is what I was meant to do.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what I was going to say to you just a moment ago. You said it kind of came about by accident, but sometimes, since I've been kind of creating over the past 5 years, I question whether anything's by accident or whether it's all a part of this grand design, this grand purpose. And you find this little thing inside of yourself. And it sounds to me like you had the same experience that I did, where you were maybe lost for what to do, and then you find this spark and sends you from kind of this way to 180 degrees, and you
yes.
walk the other way, and you kind of waking up thinking, how, where's this come from, what is it that's happened to me, and then all of these things fall into place. It sounds very much like you've had the same experience there back then.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess, I've had, 4 or 5 years of real kind of introspection
Mm.
through for different reasons and different phases of my life. But
Yeah.
I had an incredible experience. Uh, it was before COVID, and I was delivering an image. I was delivering a large print to a lovely lady who came into the gallery, and she was a bit eccentric. But I really liked her straight off,
Yeah.
and I I brought the piece into our house in Dublin, which is something I absolutely love doing. It's such a privilege to be able to
Yeah.
do that. And I walked into her living room in a very ordinary looking, um, middle class kind of housing estate. And I walked into the most spectacular art gallery that I've ever been in. I mean,
Wow.
I recognized artists on her walls straight away. This lady hadn't an inch free on her wall. Now she had a space made for my picture,
Mm.
but it was sitting beside an Irish artist's painting that they don't go for less than 50, 60 grand. And I spotted it straight away and I thought,
Mm.
wow.
Mm.
Anyway, so we chatted for a while and then she brought me into the kitchen for a cup of tea. And then she said, she was chatting to me and she started looking at me quite funny. And she said, you don't realize what you've done, have you? And I said, what do you mean? She says, you don't realize the significance, everything that's in that picture. And I said, how do you mean? She says, everything in your life has
Yeah.
led you to that moment, to making that picture.
Mm.
And I just, kind of hairs are standing up in the back of my neck.
Yeah.
And she said, everything you've done, every decision, every bad thing, every good thing that's
Mm.
happened to your life made you the person that
Yeah.
at that moment has made that picture. And that's why I love it, And I was like, wow. And then she said,
Yeah.
she said, I have a whole different read of it. She had a whole different read of it from everything from, I mean, feminism to spirituality and, everything. But she said, but that's all wrapped up in you.
Mm.
And I was like, kind of, who are you? But it turns out she was a therapist, she's a
Yeah.
psychoanalyst.
Yeah.
And it was the most incredible kind of just very obvious thing. But sometimes you need someone to say that to you
Yeah.
because you kind of think, like I've never felt that I've never you hear a lot of photographers who've had any kind of level of success talk about imposter syndrome. I've never really felt that
Mm.
because I've always felt I've worked bloody hard to get to where I am, and I've worked hard and I've done my time. So I kind of think, well, if I'm here, I've earned it.
Sure.
But at the same time, I'm kind of always asking myself, yeah, I'm here, but am I any good? Is the work any good?
Mm.
Um, and for this lady to kind of just make me realize that all you have to do is look at your images and
Sure.
see there's a reason that you were on a journey. And as soon as I did that, I had a 5, 6 hour drive home.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was like driving through, a time tunnel because I just did this whole process of kind of working backwards. And I
Yeah.
realized that, wow, she's right. There's everything
Sure.
in our life is informs our decisions. So, I do say it happened by accident, but at the same time, it's also by design.
Yeah.
And it's not as if, and when I say it happened by accident, for me, it's not like I woke up one day and said, right, that's it. I want to be a landscape photographer, and off I go. And I'm going to have a website, and I'm going to have this, and I'm going to have 10,000 followers, and I'm going to, that I've ever kind of pushed it when I had lots of people in my life telling me you
Mm.
should push it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I've always kind of pushed back and said, no, now's not the time. Now's not the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And I had large periods of my life where I felt very frustrated, especially when I saw others grab the
Yeah.
baton and run and have this instant overnight success and so on.
Yeah.
And I was just happy to just feel a little bit hard done by the world about, well, I'm busting my ass. I'm doing all this
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
No one knows me.
But
Um,
is that because you believe in things happening when they're supposed to, or is there a belief in, it's all falling into place when it's meant to, and I'm doing the right thing, I'm staying true to myself, and
I believe that now, and I certainly, that's a whole kind of philosophy and a mindset that I would have now. But for a long time, no, it wasn't. It was just more of a case of a lack of confidence and a lack of
mm.
self belief, and a bit of a massive dose of procrastination, um, and just being in a comfort zone
Sure.
of maybe not having to do it. And one of the things, as soon as I made the step, which was a bit of a leap, going from a very well paid job where I had a lot of benefits and perks, and to just suddenly the next day being self-employed and wondering, you know who's going to pay the mortgage. Thankfully it was me, and thankfully it worked right from the get-go. But I kind of had an idea because I'm not a risky person, so I had judged it. I didn't just jump off a cliff. Like I have seen some photographers do.
Yeah.
And they're braver than me. The guys who give up really good paid jobs and just decide that's it. I'm gonna, give this a go. I had worked out a lot of things, and I had a plan B. I didn't want to do the plan B,
Mm.
but I was very fortunate that it did. So I wouldn't say that I was ever super confident and knew that everything was right. But
Yeah.
now I have a feeling that, you know, I mean, if I get a knockback, if I've, quoted for a big commercial job or a commission or something like that, where I'm hoping a hotel is going to buy 100 of my prints or something, and it doesn't happen, I tend not to get too knocked back by it and upset by it. If something's going to be, it's going to be. And
Yeah.
I have had very, it kind of meanders along. And certainly with the gallery, because I run a gallery here in Kenmare, that's where I make my living from.
Yeah.
You have quiet days. I mean, we had a very quiet day today. Not a whole lot happened. And in the early days of doing that, I would have been, pretty on
Mm.
edge after a day like that, and immediately thinking, oh, this isn't working.
Is this, you mentioned before that you had this self-destructive mentality at one point? Is this where that may have kicked in back then, and you'd have thought, what am I doing, kind of thing?
No, that would come from a very different place. There's kind of different areas of my life which are quite compartmentalized.
Yeah.
They do have an effect on each other. But I think what comes with having a business, again, I'm hugely fortunate, and long may it continue, that's actually
Yeah.
successful, is you start to get confidence not only in yourself but in your idea, what you're doing,
Sure.
and the business. And then you kind of you're more confident that you can weather the storms. I mean, when COVID hit, and I knew how bad it was going to be for us,
Mm.
but I wasn't worried.
Mm.
I really didn't, because we had a very a personal situation is that my daughter is diabetic. So we had a totally different perspective on this thing. I mean, money, business, all of that didn't matter. Just as long as the four of us here were safe and healthy, that was the main thing.
Sure.
And this was at the start of it, where no one really knew what was it, whether it was that serious or not. But that was my priority straight away. And I found that I did it without hesitation and thought, okay, well, even if we're shut for 6 months, as it happens, we were closed for 7 months of the
Yeah.
first year. And then, without ever even realizing it, the remaining 5 months of the year were so busy
Mm.
that we ended up having the 2 years of COVID were two of my busiest years,
Wow. Yeah.
because there was just, people weren't spending money on anything else. And there was this pent up desire, and everyone's at home, and people were decorating their new home
Yeah. Yeah.
offices. And there was no way I could have known that. But yet I didn't panic at the beginning. And now I kind of realize that, whatever happens, happens. I mean, I rent my building where I am. I'm very fortunate to have a very good relationship with my landlord, but anything could happen when you don't have your own premises and you don't have that security. And I used to worry about that a lot. And I just kind of think, oh, what if? But now I kind of think, well, when it happens, I'll deal with it. So there's
Yeah. Yeah.
you kind of you develop that, but I wouldn't say that I've suddenly become this super chilled, confident person,
Yeah.
because I'm still, I can still be as pessimistic as I used to be. I can still worry about stuff that will never happen. But it's just I can park it, and I know when it's related to my business. I know when it's related to my work. Um, and when it's not, when it's
Yeah.
something else,
Yeah. Yeah. So going back, I was really curious about the conversation that you said you had with the lady who bought your print, the
Mm-hmm.
therapist, and how she drew attention to the fact that your whole life is in those photographs, because that's something that I've very much been kind of drawn attention to, in particular in my own process of introspection. And it's also one of the things that fuels my idea for this podcast, because I'm very aware that everybody's been through countless things, you know, like you mentioned before, traumatic events and, you know, emotional distress and all kinds of things, just relationships, like things you watch, everything kind of
Mm-hmm.
changes you. So I'm just very curious as to what maybe events you can think of back in your life that may have kind of led to this place that you're at and this path that you're on now.
Oh, I mean, look, you could go right back. I mean, and I've talked about it a little bit in another podcast, which came out in a very, unexpected way.
Right.
But it is. I mean, like a lot of things reveal themselves. And what you realize is that, certainly what I've realized is not just as a person, but as an artist, you don't just suddenly become an artist. You don't just suddenly decide, oh, I'm going to be this type of thing. I think your whole life pushes you that way in
Yeah.
such a way. And I think when you have a real connection with your subject matter, then you can reveal yourself through that. Um, but with landscape photography, I mean, the idea of just being out there in the landscape by yourself and that being okay, and the amount of time over 30 years that I've spent on my own and being perfectly happy and being, the happiest, I suppose, apart from when I'm not with friends and family and so on. Um, that's something that has comes from I suppose, the type of person you are. I know people who can barely spend 5 minutes alone
Mm.
in the room together, and they're on the phone to someone, or they're trying to arrange meetings and stuff. I quite happily, spend weeks out in the
Yeah.
landscape, and be perfectly okay with that and be very comfortable with that. Now, that has that has its roots in lots of things, going back to my childhood and so on. And developing a kind of a method for dealing with a bit of kind of the domestic kind of chaos that my life was in the early years of,
Mm.
before I left home and so on. As a young lad, developing coping mechanisms, and I suppose having that connection with nature was a big part of them, even though it wasn't a very conscious thing. It was a subconscious thing. I just, as a kid,
Yeah.
you'd find yourself, and as a teenager, I found myself on long walks and, spending an unusual amount of time by myself when on holidays. But I wasn't a loner. When I went
Yeah.
back home, I turned into a normal teenager that was, obsessed with, discos and girls and all the other stuff.
Normal.
Yeah, exactly. And didn't have time to think about anything. But I do remember, the times that I kind of now seem incredibly important to me.
Yeah.
And almost prescient that I was, you know, um, it was almost like a practice run for my later life.
Mm.
And seeing what I was comfortable with. And I'm still that kind of person. I'm not an introvert. There's a lot of talk about introverts with photography. I don't regard myself as an introvert, but if you were to examine my lifestyle, you'd instantly say I was one, because I spend so much time alone doing what I do. I prefer to photograph on my own. Um, it's there's a lot of things in your character that come forward with that. Um, so, I mean, over time, then I think different things. I worked in that sports photography job
Yeah,
agency
sure.
for 18 years, and that at times was stressful. And I worked with the owner of the agency, and we were kind of unofficial partners. And he was a great guy, but he did my head in, and we clashed and argued and everything. And I was remote working because I was down in Kerry before half the planet was remote working, and
Yeah.
they were in Dublin. So there used to be these really heated phone calls and emails and all that. And, I remember just having to just put down the phone, turn off the computer, grab the camera bag and head off. At least my
Yeah.
wife would tell me to do that because she'd look at how wound up I was.
Yeah.
And then you come back a couple of hours later and it's all forgotten. It's
Yeah.
just all dissipated. So, I mean, I lost my mum about 13 years ago and my sisters soon after. And I remember the first thing I did in both instances was, after the funerals, was head out into the landscape.
Yeah. What is it about
And
the landscape? Why do you think it is for you that you naturally gravitate towards these places?
I think it's there's definitely something there with a connection from my childhood. In that I grew up in a working class housing estate,
Yeah.
where all the houses looked the same,
Yeah.
and there was miles and miles of concrete and everything.
It's the
But
same as me. Yeah.
yeah, to the back of my house, as when I was a kid, we lived on the very fringe of the city. So from my back garden onwards was the countryside, which
Mm,
stretched all the way to the west
wow.
coast of Ireland. But as the city grew, it grew around us and
Oh,
it outflanked us, and suddenly it was cut off. And I actually felt that a lot. I really felt that as a kid. I remember feeling intensely sad when, this 6 foot wall went up between me and the fields that we used to go into.
yeah.
And I kind of remember, like, from, maybe 9 or 10 onwards, just pining for the countryside. You could still see the tops of
Mm,
trees in some fields. I think that was formative. I think that was very influential. And then any time we got out of the city, I absolutely loved it. Just seeing green fields and all that.
yeah.
We didn't have a car. We didn't have much money growing up. So, trips away and weekends, they were unheard of.
Mm,
So when you did get to go, you really relished them. And when I got to go out and visit my, relatives with my mom, and, we'd be dependent on someone to take us out there. They lived out in the country. It was just it literally was a breath of fresh air.
yeah.
Um, so I think that was quite important as a formative thing as a young person. But I suppose it's just a very simple thing of it being, peaceful and very beautiful, and providing you with, the time and space that, if you're that type of person that you need, you soak it up.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I do know people who enjoy being out in the landscape for very different reasons. They see everything as a challenge. They want to climb mountains. They want
Sure.
to windsurf everything, and the more danger they can find in the landscape, the
Yeah. Yeah.
better. I go out there to just, completely, just absolutely tune out of
Just
almost
be.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and there really is no better way to do that. When I was 20 until I moved out of the city, and if I wanted to do that where I grew up, it was, putting a pair of headphones on and going for a walk and trying to just disappear into something. But you never could. But now, with the landscape, I suppose it's instant, and
Yeah.
I'm lucky now. I get to live in it.
Yeah.
So all I get to do is look out the window.
Yeah. Funny how things
Um,
change, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I had a conversation with I moved to the west coast of Wales at the beginning of this year, and I moved in with a friend, and he was questioning me one time about my love of woodland and being outdoors, and what it is about these places that I enjoy. And it's for me, it's the stability, it's the consistency, it's identifying characters that are ever present in the landscape. Because I had a lot of changing faces when I was younger. I had three stepfathers, and we moved around the country 4 times. So there was always a change going on in my life. And
sure.
he said that, how interested he kind of was in that viewpoint of things, because he loves the chaos of the sea. He loves surfing, and he loves being in this always changing environment that's throwing him off the surfboard and, ransacking him around a little bit. And he said
Yeah.
that he had the most consistent and stable childhood. So
Yeah.
we're always looking for the opposites.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I know quite a few people like that, and some very good friends of mine who are, the absolute thrill seekers. I mean, I can't go hill walking with them. I can't do
Yeah.
anything because they're always just trying to find the most riskiest route up
Yeah.
the mountain and down the mountain. And all I want to do is not to worry. All I want to do is enjoy my walk, enjoy the hike,
Yeah.
and I don't care how long it takes. But, and then the contrast in us is exactly that, as you
Yeah.
said. They're they've come from absolute stable families. They were hugely successful in education and jobs and so on. But you'll find often that with people like that there is a little bit of turmoil in their life.
Mm.
It just mightn't have happened early on. They might be, trying to throw it off for something else. Whereas I think, those of us that might have had a bit more of an unsettled earlier upbringing, you grow up longing for peace and
Yeah,
calm and
sure.
tranquility. And when you find it, you don't want to let it go. And
Yeah,
when you connect with it on a level that I have, where it's something that, it's symbiotic. It's providing me now with a living, and I'm trying to pay a homage to that every day.
yeah,
That's a very powerful thing.
sure.
And yeah, you feel very fortunate.
Yeah, I feel like we've almost got a duty to, I don't know, for me to articulate what it's done for me and spread the message, because I feel like there are a lot of people out in the world, and especially after the events of the past few years, that really, are gonna, well, either they need it now, or they're gonna need it in the future. They're gonna need that relationship with nature, and I think it's something that the whole world could benefit from in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. But we kind of come at it from different
Yeah.
from different perspectives. I think if you're an artist that works with nature and in nature, I think you have a unique perspective of it. And I think, it we do have a responsibility that comes with that as well at the same time. And there's lots of things with landscape photography that runs against the grain of that.
Mm.
And it's there are a lot of contradictions, and there are a lot of things that aren't necessarily um, beneficial either for a person or for the landscape. And I think, there's a recognition of that now. There are people who are trying to kind of correct the balance a little bit. I think there's more of an awareness of, treating locations with a bit more respect in the landscape, and the impact that landscape photography has on the environment and on locations that we all know and love. I've firsthand experience of it. I've been one of those photographers that have discovered a place that has now since gone on to be one of these
Mm.
iconic locations. And without knowing it, and without wanting to be that guy that would ever be accused of being a kind of a gatekeeper, and it was always going to get out anywhere where it was, because someone would have found it. um I offered up the information when I was asked directly, and soon it gets out. And a year or two later, or even more recently, I go back there, and the place is destroyed. It's
Wow.
terrible. And I actually, I feel personally responsible
Mm.
for that. And now someone would have found it after me. I
Yeah.
mean, I just happened to be the first guy. And it's a waterfall in Killarney National Park that even the park rangers didn't know that this place was there. I mean, they knew the waterfall was there, but they didn't know the access and the views and the beautiful, shot that you can get there. And it's a one-dimensional place. There's only one photograph you can take of it. But when I go back there now, I see the place is trampled. I see
Mm.
broken branches. I see, paths made over rivers, and I just kind of think, did I do this?
Do you go back as a little bit of a reminder every now and then?
I do a little bit. I do, because A, it's a very beautiful place.
Yeah.
And B, I actually was never happy with the image that I got there.
Mm.
The original image that I got, which was used in my first book, God, I wouldn't really stand over it now. I've always known the potential that's there. But funnily enough, with the amount of photographers that I have seen go there, they've all come up against the same issue as I have, and they've all taken more or less the same picture.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas in my head, I had a perfect scenario. But so I go back there out of curiosity. I go back there, just, I suppose, out of fondness. I mean, I love
Yeah,
revisiting
sure.
locations. I have a real connection to my local landscape. I feel in many ways it's kind of like going back and seeing an old friend at
Yeah, I
times,
agree. Yeah, that's how I
checking
feel.
checking on it and see how it's all going.
Yeah.
It's not the nicest of feelings when you go back and you see a place that, I think is suffering, to the
Mm.
detriment of the amount of people that now want to go there and take a picture for Instagram.
Yeah. It's so tough
But
though, isn't it? Because on the other hand, you know, you want to kind of inspire people to go out and see these places and experience what we've experienced. So it is a balance, isn't it? And it's such a tough one to know what to do, what is the right or wrong way to go about things. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think like with that particular book and that particular project, um, most of the locations that I was photographing, and if they were relatively unknown, it was always going to come out because it was a national park, and the any of the places that I photographed, you couldn't keep them a secret. It's just that they weren't in, I suppose, people's consciousness. And then there'd be a whole other group of people who always knew about it, like walkers or
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
that are now photographers because everyone's carrying a smartphone. But 10 years ago, Instagram wasn't necessarily the thing it is now. And you know, it's difficult. And you have to strike a balance with that. I've seen people deliberately make a point of saying, I'm not telling you where this is, and I'm not going to name that mountain behind me.
Yeah.
And half the people watching it are going, Jesus, mate, I know where that is. There's a good intention there, but it can, are you going to do any good, or actually are you going to just drive people out there? Like, it does drive me mad a bit. There's a whole, I presume the same as in the UK and Wales, but there's a whole stream of this kind of idea of Instagrammer, influencer people doing the whole secret thing. I found the secret tree, I found the secret waterfall, I found the secret beach, and here's how to get there. I'm not going to tell you where it is, but then they do a 5-minute video on it,
Yeah.
which makes it bloody obvious where it is. And then everyone just wants to go there. And there's that kind of side of it. It kind of drives me a bit mad because I kind of think you're trying to pretend you want to keep it a secret, but actually you're just blatantly putting it out there, telling everyone, why don't you just hop in your car and drive around for 6 hours until you find this place? I think it would be better if we actually just said, look, this place is here. It's getting a bit crowded. There's litter here, or there's, when you come here, don't be an asshole. Don't start whatever, breaking branches or climbing on things or going through the farmer's field or whatever. There should be a more positive message put out there
Yeah,
about
yeah.
maybe how to actually act responsibly in some of these locations. That's just my own personal thing. I
So
mean,
breaking a branch to get your photograph is not acceptable in your world, no? It's
oh
not.
God,
It's not
no.
in mine anyway.
No, I mean, actually, it used to really bother me because
Yeah,
there was a load of shots that I just couldn't get around by because
yeah,
there'd be big branches sticking out. And I met Paul Wakefield, the landscape photographer, the English landscape photographer, who ended up writing the foreword to my book. But I met him many years before, and he was giving a talk, and someone asked him something about what's in his bag, and he says, not much else beside the camera gear and some bungee cords. And I was intrigued. I was like,
Mm.
I had to go up to him. I said, well, what's with the bungee cords? And he says, well, you can tie them onto a branch, bend it
Ah,
out of the way,
ah,
and then they move out of the way. And then when you're finished your shot, you release it and you haven't
yeah,
damaged the tree.
that's brilliant.
And I thought, that's genius.
Yeah,
So I have
that's
a bunch of,
experience for you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I have a bunch of bungee cords in my bag.
I'm
But
gonna do the same now as well.
yeah, yeah, it's actually a really useful thing.
Yeah.
But I have come across locations where I've
Mm.
seen not only branches broken, but I've seen where someone's actually brought a saw
Wow.
and cut branches off because they were sticking into the edge of the frame and so on. I just that's
Unbelievable.
and yeah, and of course you've had that incident just yesterday with the
Sure.
tree, and I think it's in Yorkshire
Yeah.
up in that Sycamore Gap, and seeing the reaction from not just the photography world, but the outpouring of
Yeah.
grief and anger. Um, you kind of think, Jesus, we have a responsibility,
Yeah.
and maybe as the guys who are showing off these locations so much to everyone, maybe we should have a little message. I mean, I try and get around the issue of naming locations, and I skirt around it a little bit. I do get asked regularly now, and it depends on the type of photographer it is, whether I will tell them exactly where it is. But it's a tricky one.
Yeah. So yeah, I had another question for you, Norman, and it was kind of reflecting on the fact that doing this for a living, I mean, just doing photography in general. Like you mentioned, you go out and stand in a bog, and you trudge through marshland and stand alone on a hilltop, and in the storms or whatever conditions that we go out and face. It takes some level of, I think, dysfunction to to want to go and do that, and you risk friends. I mean, I've kind of lost friends over the years because they haven't really understood what it is that I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and I've missed weddings, and I've
Yeah.
all of these things that have happened over the time that don't look normal to many people. So I want to kind of explore your mind a little bit as to why why do we do it? Why do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, like I asked myself that for a long time. Well, actually, I didn't ask myself that for a long time, but I was aware of the fact that I was doing it. I mean, I sacrificed a huge amount for nothing, for no
Mm.
return, for seemingly no return whatsoever. Um, I was I thought that the best way that I could spend my time as a 25-year-old guy with a girlfriend was to book a darkroom for a weekend and lock myself away. And I actually thought that was the best thing I could be doing. And in hindsight now, I'm kind of think, you idiot, what in God's name were you doing? I actually gave up. I sacrificed so many things, as you said, weddings, weekends away, you know, um, really, really cool stuff. And I kind of think, what was I doing? I mean,
Mm.
I should have just cut myself a little bit of slack. Um, but that that in itself, started to plant the seeds of that question. Why? What was that all? What was all that about? And I was just driven. I was constantly driven by this, not by a desire for success, because I knew that was going to be pretty remote. The chances of that happening, or there was no financial elements. There was nothing. In fact, it was all outgoing. I was a film shooter for 18 years, so every time you press the shutter, it costs you money.
Mm.
It's a kind of a difficult concept for people nowadays to get their head around. But every shot you took, and I was a prolific shooter. I mean, I wasn't, I was no Ben Horn, going off to, the desert for a week and taking 3 pictures. I mean, I used to burn through film, and then I'd have to get it processed, and then you'd have to pay for contacts, and then I'd be spending money, doing up 10 by 8 prints to see if they're any good. And I wasn't a very good printer, so I had nothing to show up at the end of the day. It was a strange kind of obsession. And I guess, after a while, I kind of was asking myself, what am I doing this for?
Yeah.
But it wasn't as if I was actually questioning myself. I just wanted to understand it. I
Sure.
knew that without any shadow of a doubt that this was what I was supposed to be doing, because I was never so connected, and I was never no switched on, and I was never so sure of anything in my life. But I had no idea what it was about. I did kind of explore that idea, in a bit of detail when I was doing my second book. And I very deliberately structured the book around the idea of what I wanted to discover what type of photographer I was by having a very set idea of an area that I was going to photograph, and having the creative license to make the images that were just interesting to me.
Mm.
I was at this stage very fortunate to have the gallery up and running. I had enough experience to know that I was going to sell X amount of books, regardless of how successful it was outside the gallery. I was going to sell a certain amount of books. So I was able to actually factor the whole thing out and say, this is a project that, regardless of any other side of it, it's going to work. It would be worth doing. So I really indulged myself. And in doing that, I turned it into a very personal project for myself, where every morning I kind of went out and I really thought about the type of images that I wanted to make. There were times where I felt like I was forcing it. There were times when I felt I wanted to force myself into being this artistic photographer. And, is, you know, like, is it a waste of time spending an hour photographing this rock? You know, what, like, and then actually, you know, it never was, it never felt fake. It always felt, no, this is an intrinsic part of the landscape that I find interesting. And then when you put it all together, it tells a story in a book. So there was, I discovered that, you know, that I was genuinely um, drawn and had a connection here. And that this is the type of photographer that I was quite happy that I was becoming and that I wanted to be, and I was comfortable in the space. But that in itself kind of drew out a whole other area of introspection. And it did have, you know, it did have that idea, which later developed on in my third book, which again, this isn't a process that I've written out and that this is what I'm going to do. This just happens. Yeah. So this process kind of evolves, where I became more and more kind of introspective
Yeah.
over the making of the book. Um, and I kind of realized that there was a lot more at play here. And, you know, we've alluded to it earlier on about kind of, I suppose, what gets you to where you are as a photographer.
Yeah.
And I realized that there was a lot more that was informing kind of the type of photographer that I was going to be or that I wanted to be. It was all tied up with the person that I was as well,
Yeah.
obviously. Um, and, you know, I did have a kind of a moment of, you know, almost like a kind of a little bit of an epiphany where I just finally joined all the dots together. And I did make the realization about that, you know, what I was talking about earlier about that young kid kind of pining for nature and using nature as, you know, this kind of cathartic kind of healing tool, when there wasn't much else in, you know, in my life that could have done that. These days, I think we're far more aware. There's so much support out there for youngsters, and, you know, you can talk to people and everything. Back then, when I was kind of in the midst of a family that was just, you know, in crisis a lot of the time, and there was just a lot of noise and chaos and hurt and drama going on around all the time. You know, the only thing I figured out that I could do was, you know, just head off for a long walk out on the beach and sand dunes when we were on holidays. And that was something that, you know, I had no idea, and I kind of filed away. But I made that connection when I was out, you know, making my book in Kingdom, because I continued that process of kind of this self analysis.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't want to get bogged down in it, and I don't want to be constantly kind of going over
Mm.
you know, old stuff. But I just feel, for me, it was hugely important to kind of put the final pieces in the puzzle to realize, oh, actually, you know, this is where I'm coming from. This is like what's pushed me into this. This is why this all means so much to me. And actually, that being fully informed um, of the type of person that you are, that's guiding the type of artist you want to be, I think is a really, really powerful thing. Certainly for me, it was. I mean, it was a very, very powerful moment, and the realization of it and everything just gave me a much more completer picture. I often, I often question parts of what I do. That, am I ambitious enough?
Mm.
Am I, should I be working harder? Should I be on YouTube? Should I be chasing, more notoriety, and should people know me more, and so on? Or am I a bit lazy that I've just kind of, I happen to have stumbled upon a recipe for selling my work in a very good place, in a very good way, that's given me a nice living. And I'm kind of resting on my laurels on that. And should I be doing more?
Mm.
And, I suppose without kind of knowing really what it is about me, and what it is that kind of has informed me and pushed me along this way, I think I'd be kind of constantly questioning that. But, fully understanding the type of photographer that I think you are meant to be, and the type of photographer that reflects, accurately, type of artist that reflects
Yeah.
accurately you as a person, I think is a very powerful thing. And it's a very, very useful tool to have in your bag, because, you know, there's nothing better to show in photography than authenticity, than to
Yeah,
show
agreed. Yeah.
a true representation of how you interact with whatever subject. It could be models, it could be the studio, it could be
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, I know lots of photographers that in different areas of photography, and their personality comes through in their work. I mean, I know some studio photographers that are absolute meticulous geniuses with lighting, but I, in my view, everything is overlit, everything is overworked at times. Portrait photographers who are, again, incredibly, technically talented, and everything is pin sharp and in focus and everything, but there can sometimes be a lack of personality there.
Mm,
And then I know guys who are just, driven by emotion, and they are just, their raw personality comes out in everything they do, but yet they mightn't be the most technical of photographers, and certainly I'm not.
mm.
um Technical perfection comes way down the list
And you
in
you prefer to rely on your emotions more so than the logic, right?
yeah, I mean, I certainly prefer that when that comes through in an image. I you know I realize I'm kind of unique. There were a few. We're in a minority, the people like me who actually have their work in a public facing area every day, where just members of the public,
Yeah.
random people, come in, and you're in a position where you actually can see their interaction with it. I think we're a little bit skewed and a little bit kind of led into a distorted reality by social media, thinking that
Yeah.
likes and so on and everything are actually real.
Mm,
Whereas when I get interaction from day-to-day people, it's quite revealing. And so I realize it's kind of unique, my position, that I get to experience that and see people's reactions to my image.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, not everyone can have that kind of insight. Uh, for me, I'm very, very fortunate that I do. So it informs, my opinion. It informs a lot of my own kind of my self awareness as a photographer.
Yeah.
And I just when people come in and they see and they have an emotional reaction to an image, that means something to me.
Mm.
When someone comes in, I mean, you know, no one comes in and says, "Oh my God, that's pin sharp."
No.
And if they did, I would have no reaction
Yes.
whatsoever. I don't know what I'd say to that.
Yeah.
Or no one comes in and says, "Oh, you got your exposure bang on there." I mean, people do come in and they're critical. I mean, I see photographers come in, and some photographers, they're quite shy at times and so on, and they come in very surreptitiously and they're walking around, but both myself, my wife, and the guy who works for me, we can spot them a mile away. I mean, there's
Mm,
just something about photographers in galleries,
yeah.
and I can see that they're looking for the technical flaws in the image,
Yeah.
and I've done it. I mean, I've done it. I've gone to the photographers gallery in London, and you know kind of gone, oh my God, that's out of focus, without I'm completely missing the whole point of the work. um, and I can see, and you can easily pick out, technical flaws in a
Yeah.
lot of my images, but that's not the point, because then you're not seeing the image, you're not
Yeah.
seeing the work, you're not seeing what I was trying
What
to
are
to
what are
say
you
with that.
saying? Exactly. And that's much
Yeah,
more my interest and my focus is what is the person saying behind the photographs. That's much more interesting to me. And diving into some of the philosophical thoughts and the like
yeah.
you mentioned, the healing journey. It's so much more interesting than what F number was that shot at, and why is it so soft around the edges? What lenses were they using? That stuff is just it's irrelevant. It's a tool, isn't it? And with a
Yeah,
driving the tool.
I mean, it has its place. I
Yeah.
mean, and I would never, I'm always conscious. I don't want to ever come across as if I'm knocking that, because there are a lot of people who get a huge amount of photography and sorry, a lot of people who get a huge amount of enjoyment out of photography, based on, a lot of kind of they're quite rightly proud that they have got developed a level of competency, and they have there's aspirations there, and they like challenges, and they like learning new techniques and so on. I mean, I was recently away on a trip with a trip I never thought I'd really find myself on, but I did. I went with five other photographers to Iceland, and these are guys at the top of their game. They're a couple of big YouTubers and real, and I mean, we nerded out on photography talk. I mean, it was just, and I found myself saying, actually, do you know what? There's no harm in this. We talked about gear, and we talked about techniques, and we talked about stuff, but at the same time, when it came time for us all to be creative and all to do our own thing, that just seamlessly
Yeah.
happened. And we had a lot of time together. So I'm talking about sitting around a campfire with beers and
Oh,
stuff.
beautiful. Yeah.
I mean, and it was great. And I found myself going, wow, this is really great. I'm learning loads off these guys. So I really like that. But at the same time, we were all able to appreciate each other's work, the artistry in it, and where we are, and have mutual respect. Whereas sometimes people only see the technical elements.
Sure.
They'll judge your work on a technical basis, and that holds very little interest for me. But I'm well aware that anytime I do talks and so on to camera clubs and so on, which I love doing, I'm fully prepared to have to try and answer the technical questions at the same
Yeah,
time. And
sure.
there'll
Yeah.
always be three or four who'll put their hands up and say, what shutter speed did you use for that picture? Usually my answer is, I have no idea.
Yeah.
And it's like people are kind of taken aback by that, but I really don't.
Is that
I'd have
because
to
you're,
look at the
yeah, sorry. Yeah, go on.
I would have to look at the at the data
Yeah, yeah,
to work it out.
yeah.
So it's not something that's really there at the front of my mind. I want the
Yeah.
camera to kind of almost disappear. Um, I'm quite a rudimentary photographer when I'm out in the landscape, and I'll often shock horror. I'll often shoot on aperture priority if I simply just don't want to be thinking about settings.
Mm.
I manually focus.
Yeah.
I still do. That's just basically because I shoot with a certain type of lenses all the time.
Yeah.
I used to for a couple of years, which is really stupid, but I used to carry my light meter with me, and I used to
Right.
meter off my light meter before I trusted the meter
Yeah.
in the
Is
5D
this
5D
habits
Mark II
because
that I
you
had.
were a film photographer
Yes,
first?
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a bit of habit, and there's certain benefits to the workflow that I have, that I know that I don't want to change. I did all the things. I made all the mistakes. When I switched to a Sony A7 something or other, because everyone was telling me that was the best camera to have, and I bought one and I took it out on a trip, and it was an absolute unmitigated disaster for me. And I sold it, a few weeks later, and I realized, don't try and force it. Don't try and complicate things. Keep doing what you're doing. And actually, it was funny. Out of a lot of our discussions with the guys I went to Iceland with, it very quickly emerged that I was the kind of Luddite of the group, and I was,
What do you mean Luddite?
I mean, I wasn't this mad techie person. I
Oh, okay.
wasn't this, I
Yeah,
wasn't
that would
trying
be
to
me as
edge.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but actually, I mean, each and every single one of them all came and said, well, actually, whatever you're doing, just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah,
um
sure.
we talked a lot about processing techniques and stuff, which mine are absolutely pure basic.
Yeah.
And it's not that I don't have a desire to learn. I really do. I enjoy learning kind of new stuff all the time. It's really just I'm very conscious of trying to keep a consistency, and I know that if I know how to do something like whatever focus stacking or blending different stuff and all that, and I wouldn't be able to genuinely stand over that when someone comes into my gallery. And unfortunately, one of the first things a lot of people do when they see photography is they'll ask you, was it like that? What have
Yeah.
you done to this image? Is that photoshopped? The
Yeah.
horrible
Yeah.
question. And you have to be able to genuinely say, well, it's color corrected and I've adjusted the contrast in it because the files come out flat of the camera. But yeah, no, it was pretty much like that. And that's how I process my images. And it's with a very light touch and so on. I'm not trying to be a purist or anything here. I have huge respect for the guys who can do amazing things. But for me, it's about, kind of this a consistency and an authenticity to my work,
Yeah. Sure.
which I think suddenly if I started processing my images like what's that American chap, Mark Adamus.
Oh yeah.
If I suddenly started making my images like that, everyone would be like, what have you done?
What are you doing? Yeah.
What drugs are you on now? Or you've gone to someone's workshop, and you
Sure.
can see that. You can see that sometimes when people
Yeah.
do that,
I feel like it shows a
they
level of,
pivot.
yeah, it shows a level of perhaps uncertainty in them in yourself if you were to change all of a sudden. I'm all for improvements, but I think you've got to get to a point where you're happy with what you're producing, and you build an audience based on what you're producing. That you've got to stay true to that, right? And no matter how
Yeah,
long it takes to build and how slowly things happen, you're being true to yourself, and that's what this whole thing should be about, I think.
yeah. It for me, it's about growth, and it's about on a progression. I'm certainly a much different photographer than I was 10 years
Yeah.
ago.
Okay.
And I really enjoy recognizing that fact. I really
Yeah.
enjoy the fact that there could be a blazing sunset outside my house with red skies and it all happening with fire in the sky,
Yeah.
and I just don't feel the attraction to go and photograph that anymore.
Yeah.
I would be looking the other direction to see what's happening with all that red light on the bare rock of the mountain or something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's
Sure.
the type of photographer I've become. I'm not saying that that's any better than anyone else, but it's just who I've and I kind of realized, oh, actually, yeah. Over the years, I've changed. Over the years, I've
Yeah.
grown.
How would you say you
There's
have
things that I've
changed? Yeah. In mainly.
um I think, I mean, in photographic terms, I think in a way, for anyone to easily understand it, it would be that I guess I've become more interested in how light falls on the landscape rather than where it comes from. Um, I was one of those guys that would stare at the horizon for an hour before sunrise, waiting for it all to
Yeah.
happen, waiting for it to all kick off and thinking that that's what it was all about, and forgetting to turn around and seeing actually what happens with, uh, the light that's actually just hitting the landscape and so on. That's in its simplest terms.
Yeah.
Um, but I've kind of become more connected to the signs and messages and the story that a certain landscape is telling me. I'm very interested in that. I'm very, very aware though that images that I make that I find very significant are really, really hard for that message to come across to the viewer. And whereas I can see the relevance in, a pile of rocks in the middle of a field and whatever, and know the history of a place and maybe be considering lots of different factors, someone else could just go, it's just a pile of rocks, and so I'm aware that I'm kind of photographing more than just my subject matter more and more, and I'm influenced by surroundings. I'm influenced by my whole experience of a place. That generally does work though, and it does kind of push me into a state where I feel very, very comfortable and you know primed to make something, some creative work, and something will come out of it. It might not be what I thought I was going
Mm.
there for, but
Yeah.
something will come out of it. And because I primarily work in book projects, which I have done for the last 13 years, And basically, the way I work is I'll work from book to book, and those book projects are getting longer and longer now. So my current one is probably going to be a 3-year project.
Mm.
Um, that will mean that the most of the work that I'll make for the next 3 years will be in and around a book project, and uh, I'm lucky if some of those images will then feed into the gallery, and there'll be, it's usually quite a low percentage. It's usually maybe 10% of the work that will ever get printed and shown in the gallery, but that's enough because that's more than enough to sustain it. Um, but what that means is that I kind of work towards a kind of a theme, an idea,
Yeah.
and these images that I feel are quite important to me, but just don't stand on their own. Suddenly, you put them with other images, and there's a narrative there, and there's a relevance,
Yeah.
and they work
Yeah.
as a cohesive body
Sure.
of work.
Yeah.
But I actually really like that a lot of them don't stand on their own. I love that an image can work in a book
Yeah.
and go as a part of the story of a place, and kind of enhance what you're trying to say about it, but that it doesn't necessarily, it's not a banger.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not just you're not gonna print this off and
Yeah.
everyone just go, wow.
It's
I'm not
really
really in.
interesting. Sorry,
Yeah.
yeah, you're not really
No, no,
into.
sorry. I'm just not really into the wow
Yeah, sure.
images. I find,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I feel like we've all probably been there and done that perhaps. And it's beautiful to see the evolution behind photographers as they go through their, creative journeys or whatever, spiritual journeys or whatever. The things they end up looking for in a landscape are so different to what they were looking for, at the beginning. And it just goes to show the growth that people go through as human beings before photographers, to see things in different ways. And I guess a lot of it can depend on maybe what you're going through in that period of life as well, right? You mentioned catharsis a few times, and that, we always feel different things, different emotions that need to be expressed, and how work can represent those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny though, um, looking back at some of my earlier work, because for my last book, Kingdom, which was
Mm-hmm.
basically a re-look at the landscape that has had the greatest impact on my life, which is the county of Kerry, where I kind of live in now.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of my earlier work is very, very similar to
All
what I
right.
made for that book, and I
Oh,
just thought, wow. And I met a very good photographer friend of mine based in Germany, and she just produced this incredible conceptual film about her work. And I kind of said to her, I said, sometimes I just feel like I've been taking the same picture for 30 years. And she said, well, what's wrong with that? You know, there's actually nothing wrong with that. There's some people who paint the same picture their whole life. They just, there's an element of you that's what you're saying. And that in a way was kind of reassuring.
mm,
Um, that I haven't ever really been trying to force it as such. There's definitely earlier work that God, if it ever sees the light of day again, I'd be embarrassed. But and I've made all the mistakes when I switched to digital camera. I had a wide angle lens, so everything was shot at 16 mil
yeah.
and all of that kind of stuff. Um, but now I find that there's actually images that I make now, which I really, really love. And I can go back, 20, 30 years and look at contact sheets and go, oh, wow, you took that picture then as well. Which is kind of really interesting
That is
to
really
me. And
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and I kind of, I think sometimes, uh, I feel one of my biggest weaknesses, or at least a chink in my armor, is that I take my photography way too seriously. I don't take
Okay.
myself seriously as a person,
Yeah.
because I try and have a laugh about most things, but
Yeah.
I take my photography
Sure.
very seriously, it's got me into trouble. Where I'll defend my photography, and I'll stand over it, and I'll get quite defensive if I feel someone is taking liberties and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I know people who just shrug their shoulders and just go, nah, I don't care. Let them off. Let them copy me. Let them do, you know. And I go, no, no, no. It's really important. You have to, you know. And I kind of look back at a very early age in a very early stage of my career, when I was taking those pictures, and I kind of thought, actually, yeah, I was quite serious about it then as well. And that
Yeah.
kind of that was very beneficial to me, because even as an amateur, even as someone who was going through college, even as someone who was just taking pictures while I was doing another job, I took it really, really seriously. I actually photographed as though there was an end result here. You know, we're not, in fact, all it was actually filing another contact sheet into folder and maybe doing the odd print. Now, I did sell some work. I always had very modest print sales through
Yeah.
some small galleries and so on. Um, but I took it very seriously. And I kind of think, well, actually, you know, I wish at times I could, and I'm trying to learn to let things go a little bit. It was very interesting as I'd gone away with the five lads in Iceland. We were all very, very different characters, and it was interesting. We had a lot in common, but then we had an awful variance in how we deal with certain situations.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, I realized, yeah, wow, okay, so that's how you could deal with that instead of the way that I dealt with it. You know, um, I don't know if I'm going to change, but it was it
Yeah.
was interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, I have an interesting thought there because you mentioned something before, and I actually did. I read a little article on the internet as well that was covering your work and your books, and it mentioned in there about you described yourself as the grey child, and I think it was maybe you'd written that, or maybe they'd written that about you. I can't remember, but it was basically describing this idea of feeling lost and directionless and not knowing where to go. And I wonder if, you know, you finding this camera, this art, this thing about yourself, whether that's maybe made you, you know, hold on to it so tightly, and this is, you know, my baby now, and that's why it's
Oh
become
yeah,
so serious for you.
oh absolutely. That's it in a nutshell. That's why I take it so seriously, because this is, you know, I can't understate it, but you know, landscape photography has been the most important thing that's ever happened to me in my life.
Yeah.
It's just simply, it's my whole identity is wrapped up in it.
Mm,
I would I would love to be known for a variety of things, but you know, I wasn't very good at anything else. You know, I wish that I was a better sportsman, and I wish I could play guitar better and be able to sing a song and so on. But you know, I mean, for me, my whole identity was wrapped up, and it was the first time in my life that suddenly, you know, from going from, you know, as you said, this, you know, a kid that could have just completely slipped through everyone's lives without being the slightest bit remarkable for anything. Um, and I literally, there was actually nothing in my life that, apart from being an avid music person and having a bit of an odd taste in clothes compared to most of my friends, um, which they found slightly odd, but you know, I embraced it. Other than that, there was very little else. And then suddenly this wonderful thing of photography comes along, and
yeah.
then you start identifying as a photographer, and then you see yourself reflected in images that you've made.
Yeah.
And for me personally, it was hugely important, and that's why I took it so seriously. I made a lot of sacrifices to
Mm,
to do what I had to do. I had to get support to put myself through college again.
yeah.
I'd all of that kind of stuff. And then, you kind of end up spending, all of the money that you make on cameras and
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff in film. So yeah, it was very important. It's given me a real sense of identity. And I don't know if I'd had any other career that I'd actually be able to strongly, say that. I don't know how many accountants there are out there that really go to bed at night going, yeah, I'm an accountant. I think in their head there's something else. Um, but for me, it's been a very, affirming part of my life. And that's probably why I take it so seriously, and I'm quite protective of it.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm quite passionate about it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's beautiful, and I'm enjoying hearing and seeing the passion in your eyes when you talk about it as well. That's something that's
Right.
really quite interesting to observe. Yeah, I had something to mention, but I've just actually forgotten. I've lost my train of thought now, so I'll cut this a little bit when I remember what I was going to say.
Sure.
Oh, it's really good as well. The thing is, Norman, you speak, and in my head, I formulate 5 or 6 questions as you're going along. I need to, I don't know what I need to do. Maybe adopt some kind of mechanism where I write these things down as you speak. So not you, but just people in general.
Sure. Well, no, I mean, this is certainly one of the more enjoyable chats I've had because I've done a few podcasts where people have sent me questions in advance, and I listen back and I just don't like it. It feels like, oh, it just feels that it feels not necessarily very natural, a natural chat, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, don't necessarily, yeah, feel that you have to kind of cover any bases. A conversation, I suppose, can go
Yeah.
wherever it will.
Yeah. That's what I'm enjoying about this one. It's going in all kinds of different tangents and directions. So it's
Sure.
great. I'm just wondering what time we're on, Norman.
I think you've got about 7 minutes left.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
So I just had my yeah. Okay, so we'll segue back in there.
sure.
So you mentioned just a moment ago about how you see parts of yourself, or you began to see parts of yourself in the landscape, and that's something I really want to pick your brains on, actually, because it's something that's been apparent to me in my own work over the past probably few years as things have developed as well. And I want to just explore your thoughts a little bit more in terms of that. What are you seeing?
Um, I'm not sure if I'm actually trying to see parts of myself
Ah,
out there, really. I mean, I certainly, um, yeah, I guess in many ways, yeah, I think through images you make, you do reveal what you're interested in. So I think I probably see that more in the results of what I do, and it's something that reveals itself later on. And it's something I suppose you begin to get used to. Um, but I sometimes work in landscapes that uh, are they can be almost the opposite of who I am. There can be an element of you know danger. There can be
mm,
risk.
mm,
I'm not one of those guys that will walk right out onto the most ridiculously slippy rock right at the edge of the shore with crashing waves and be one of those fellas. I'm actually just now kind of constantly going, right, well, where can I safely take pictures here? That would still be interesting. And sometimes, yeah, the landscape does reveal itself to me in a way that I'm very comfortable with and familiar. Um, but I guess the things that my attention is drawn to, I suppose, yeah, it would reveal something about me that, um, but sometimes I actually try and ignore that because I don't want it to become, almost a typecast situation where I'm shooting yet another wall, with a diagonal leading into the frame and so on. And I've noticed that I do have a tendency to kind of keep working on motifs that I'm drawn to. I do want to see new things,
yeah,
and I think there's a pitfall in kind of constantly looking for something that's familiar and
sure.
that is reassuring and so on and that reflects you. I
Mm,
think should ideally we should go there with an open mind all the time and try see new things, and
mm,
that's what I it's not that easy. You have to work at it. When I was in Iceland last month, I went there with the specific brief of not taking an Icelandic type picture.
yeah,
Um, and I managed it. I think
right.
I think I came away with a body of images that certainly from a lot of feedback I've got was like people are saying this isn't like anything I've seen before from Iceland, or rather the work overall. There's probably one or two of them in there, but that was hard work.
Yeah,
That was like really like, okay, Norm, that waterfall is amazing, but you're not photographing it. You know, you
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
look. There's something else here. There has to be something else, and they weren't necessarily going to be better pictures, or they weren't necessarily going to be more interesting pictures. But I really enjoyed that process.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, you're looking for your work to reflect yourself, but I think, yeah, I don't know whether you project that onto the landscape that you're working with, or that you can actually find it in the landscape you're working with. That's one of the things I suppose I'm working out.
Yeah.
Um, which is, yeah, it's all part of the process, as they
It
say.
is. It is for some. Yeah, I feel like some people definitely have that analytical approach to photography, where they're using it for a way of figuring themselves out, and personal kind of growth, personal development, and also in some ways some kind of self creation as well, where you become what you surround yourselves with. So if we are outdoors in nature, maybe we become more like nature, and it has an impact on us and can affect our energy, or whatever it
Sure.
is that it's doing. Yeah. So just a quick one to finish this up now, Norman, because I know we're running out of time. So I wonder where you feel like you might be now without photography.
Oh, well, yeah, we'd need a lot more than a minute then. But I do think about that, but I know I wouldn't be as happy. I know I
Yeah,
wouldn't be as contented. I don't think I'd have the amazing life that I have.
yeah,
I'd probably be living in a city. I'd probably be working in a bar or a hotel, maybe running a bar.
yeah.
Um,
Not
God,
quite as fun.
it's an awful thought, but
Not quite as
there you
healing.
go.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, no,
maybe
thank,
we'll save that for a part two then at some point, maybe in the next year or two.
sure.
Okay. Norman, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on and giving me your time and opening up some wonderful avenues to conversation. I'm
Yeah,
sure
no,
a lot of people
I
are going to
enjoyed
take a
it.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
thanks, Brad.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Norman. Okay.
Cheers.
Okay, ladies and gents, thank you very much for tuning in to this episode. I am sure you enjoyed the conversation with Norman as much as I enjoyed it. We, of course, covered a lot of ground, and I'd like to thank Norman for being so open and honest and raw, and sharing a lot more of the deeper side of his creativity and his photography and affinity with nature. Really, I think it really helps to shine a light on our reasons for creating, and hopefully allows people to take something away with them, and maybe enhance their own knowledge and their own reasons for pursuing this art form, which we all love dearly. So yeah, the podcast was of course born through some frustrations that I certainly felt earlier on in the year, when the photography in a small way was kind of placed underneath other forms of art, which left me with a little bit of a frustration, and just ignited some fight within me to maybe restore some credibility, or increase some credibility rather, to our form of art, which, as you heard via this conversation, that there's a lot more that goes into these works than meets the eye. So again, Norman, thank you very much, and ladies and gents, thanks for tuning in. I look forward to bringing you the next episode. Just on another note, I have just released some landscape photography workshops for next year, and a very exciting photography workshop come creative retreat with Mark Robbins. If you didn't listen to my episode with Mark, then it may be worth heading over to watch that now, or to listen to it if you're on Spotify. We had a fascinating conversation and have both gravitated to woodland, really, after walking similar paths and living similar early lives. So we thought we'd put something together, and hopefully we'll get a group of people together and really open some eyes, and force some levels of introspection. Not that we're going to force any introspection, but of course hopefully we can encourage some introspection and deeper thought as to why people do what they do. So that's taking place next year, November the 15th to the 20th, and then we also have two one-day workshops that have just been launched in the spring, on April the 6th and April the 7th. It's a Saturday and Sunday, and we hope to encourage lots of people to come along and to share our thought processes, and we're more than happy to share what makes us do what we do. And yeah, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in, and see you soon.